Welcome to the 3DHP for the Nation Interest Group Meeting for November. We haven't chatted in a while, so as you all know, this is our opportunity to catch up on project activity. Most of you know by this point, if you're here, that this is part of a cooperative program between NSGIC and USGS. Just a brief update, this is project year 3 of 4 potential. It ends December of this year. And USGS and NSGIC are actively working to renew the project for the next year, so that's the good news. As you know, these meetings replace the forum 2 to 3 times a year, and they're held in the same time space. So again, thank you for joining us. If you have things you'd like to discuss or share with the community, please contact me, and we'd love to have you on the program. Too much of me talking most of the time. With that said, today we're going to get a quick update from the USGS 3DHP program. Subuto's here with us. We're going to revisit our critical factors. We're going to talk a little bit about some culvert mapping good practices and then share your information. So if you have things you want to share, you might want to queue up something for your discussion. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Subuto. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. I'm clicking through one slide and you're not seeing what I'm seeing. Now let me throw it to Subuto.
Linda, I said earlier today it's going to be one of those days.
You know it.
Those days. Oh, thanks, Linda. So I think I've shared this with some of you or many of you, but just as a recap of FY23 for data acquisition for 3DHP. Alaska is well underway. It's been going since about 2019 or FY 2019 with about 230,000 square miles through FY22, and we added another 88,000 square miles that are either available or in progress. And those data the data that's available will be ingested into the 3DHP this fiscal year. And for CONUS Islands and Territories, we've had a slower start with that as we pilot acquisition from the 1 meter LiDAR data, but we did have kind of a boom this year or this past year and added 47,000 square miles that are being acquired now in the kind of bright cyan blue. And I will remind folks that our initial FY24 data collaboration announcement, the project submissions are in review. The acceptance of any of those submissions is pending final federal budget. So if you're watching the news, Interior is likely to have a budget or we're in a continuing resolution until February 2nd. So we'll see what happens going forward, see what the Senate votes on the next few days. Next slide. And just a recap of FY23 and where we're going in FY24. FY24 will be the first full year of 3DHP implementation. As many of you know, we retired NHD and WBD and NHD plus high-res last year and are moving forward with 3DHP. We did at the end of FY23 release the initial data model via a service. And most of the data in that service is the legacy 24K better NHD. There is one 8-digit hydrologic unit in Alaska that's populated with elevation derived hydrography, and the hydrologic unit number is on the slide. We'll be working to add functionality to the data in FY24, and the first downloadable annual release is planned for late in FY24. And again, we'll be adding more of the EDH that we've accepted through our contracting mechanism in FY24. So we'll see more EDH coming online. We do, and we've published the initial 3DHP product specification. I want to note there's a difference. We have a elevation derived hydrography data acquisition specification that many of you are familiar with. And now we have a 3DHP product specification, and you can access that at the URL on the slide. And there is available on those pages a crosswalk between 3DHP and NHD that we hope you find useful going forward. As far as retiring our legacy data sets, the final national NHD products have been released. And the regional and state downloadable products are expected a little bit later in calendar year 23. The final version of WBD will be available in late FY24. There's some updates that the WBD team is working on. That data set will remain available for the foreseeable future. We are looking forward to developing a new drainage area system that's integrated with the 3DHP. And those drainage areas will be produced as we build catchments. And those catchment will be built on the new 3D hydrography or elevation derived hydrography as that's incorporated into the data set. And then finally, our final national release of the NHD Plus high-res is planned for Q2 of FY24. So that's a lot of what we've done and where we're going. And I'll pass it back to Linda, unless Linda, you want to stop for questions if there are any.
Yes, please. Any questions for Sue? A lot of information here. If you have a question, you can come off of mute. Sounds like they got it, Sue.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
All right. Many of you will remember that we ran a survey very early in the project. And because it was a compilation of what are you looking forward to, what do you have concerns about, what does this 3DHP thing mean to you? So we've used the term critical factors. What are the critical factors about 3DHP? Challenges, concerns, recommendations. We ran that in 2020, and we've used it a lot to drive the activities that we're doing as part of the project. And I just want to let you know that we visit these every year, and so we thought it would be a good idea because we sat down with USGS September and October and went through these, and we thought it would be good if we could just kind of report back to you how 3DHP is shaping up or evolving with respect to some of these critical factors. When we did the initial survey, there were sort of four main areas. One was integration. There was actually five. I just combined two here. The integration with the related national data sets, such as the NHD, the NWI, things like that, as well as integration with state framework data sets, how this was all going to work. There were technical considerations, exactly like what are the methods and practices that are going to get us towards this national data set? Who's going to do what, the roles and responsibilities? And then how do we plan and implement for these things? So again, those were sort of the basic questions, and we're just going to take a brief, well, maybe not as brief as Sheila, we're going to take a walk through some of these. So with regards to integration with related national and state framework data sets, one of the key things I think that participants need to be aware of is that there is a federal 3DHP working group, and Dennis Peterson from Tennessee is the NSGIC liaison to that group. And there's a dialogue, monthly dialogue. So they are talking to each other. And they are engaged in the development of the model and the product. And in addition to providing input, they're also planning for the alignment of their data and operations. And so a couple examples that we heard, I believe it was in July, from the National Wetlands Inventory, that they're revisiting their data development workflows and specifications to better integrate with the 3DHP data model. There were some questions, well, what's going to happen with the waters of the U.S. regulatory data when this happens? And obviously 3DHP, as Sue has made clear, Sue and team have made clear, is not a regulatory data set, though it may have been utilized that way by some state and federal agencies. So EPA is part of the dialogue, and they are certainly looking at what is the impact going to be on their current legislation. Incorporation of existing national hydrography data sets. As most of you know, the original intent was not to include the NHD, and as Sue's just explained, the legacy NHD is in there, and it's going to persist without updates until 3DHP data is developed for the region. This provides some continuity, as you all know, and you all asked for. And each slide, I'm going to stop and see if Sue, Steve, or Sylvia, if anybody from the 3DHP team wants to add any comments. All right. In addition, I think we've gotten this message out there, and let's just make sure it's not lost. This is a simplified data model. This is not your mother's NHD. So it's a simplified data model. It retains core features, but it's going to provide a linear referencing system, so folks will be able to associate any additional content that they want. So if you have things that are essential to the way you assess or model your practices, you can associate those attributes with the features. You might want to bring in, maybe there's NHD or WBD features that you use on a regular basis. Maybe you have your own state framework hydrography features, or if there's local and regional data. So this is a simplified infrastructure for the nation upon which others can can reference their information. 3DHP team.
No, Linda, I don't think there's have any updates on that one.
Okay. Some of the technical considerations. This is how's this really going to work? And one of the things that it came up is like, boy, we'd really like some standardized culvert mapping guidance. How to map culverts so they work in this new system. And the 3DHP EDH specification provides guidance on decisions to be made when mapping culverts, and what they refer to as elevation breaching connectors. So there's guidance in the specification. But we realize that a lot of this data is being developed outside of the EDH environment. And so, as most of you are aware, 3DHP is working closely with our project to sort of identify a core set of state and regional mapping good practices. And the focus of these was not to support any specific application like fish barriers or transportation, but more to look at how the information you're collecting in your own environment would support hydrographic and hydraulic modeling across administrative boundaries, and as well as the hydro-enhanced digital elevation model development. So, and as you know, we'll be talking about those good practices here at the second half of the meeting. And standardizing hydrography data across administrative boundaries, how is that going to happen? 3DHP as a national data set is going to utilize a single approach for the coordinate system, the measurement units, hydrologic units, stream permanents. They're going to have one way of doing this. And as they've discussed they are exploring methods to support maybe translation to your local coordinator measurement system, stream permanence values, things like that, and also to administer funding in a way where states and partners work hydrologic units cross boundaries. So in other words, we know there's Dennis has made clear from Tennessee he can't pay for data developed outside of his state, even though his watershed boundary or his hook goes beyond the state. And USGS is cognizant of that and is working with states to say, well, maybe that's the part that the feds pick up versus the state is paying for. And again,
I will hop in and say, and yes, we certainly are encouraging cross-boundary collaboration between states, which you guys are great at. But that also will help to ease the issues with spending funding outside of your state boundaries. And I think highlighting the idea of consistency, that's one of the things we're really striving for, consistency in the data and having sort of an easier understanding of a single data set, where the information that you need is in that data set or can be linked to that data set, rather than having multiple different data sets and versions of data sets that get a little bit confusing. So that's our big hope, is that whole goal of simplifying.
And with that said, Sue, I see that Jane's got a question in the comments. She's asking, will USGS topo maps continue to use legacy NHD data until 3DHP is available for that area? And will they continue to use the current symbology for perennial and intermittent streams and exclude ephemeral streams?
Yeah, I don't have a ton of information on that. My understanding is that the cartographic group will start transitioning to the 3DHP version of the data. And we know that most of that is actually legacy NHD data, so that when the data gets replaced, it will be the updated elevation derived hydrography. I think that transition is going to happen over the course of this coming fiscal year, but probably not really going to be completely done or happening until FY25. I don't know what the symbology plans are at the moment, so that's probably TBD. And I don't know if Sylvia has any other comments, or Steve, but that's what we know so far, Jane.
All right. Again, one of the questions, well, what are the roles and responsibilities? I think when we initially start this project, our perception as states is that we would continue in the stewardship role, hand in hand, developing the data. And obviously, that's not the role that's going to be used. It's more of a LiDAR or 3D data acquisition model. So one of the keys is that the utilization of private sector to develop the data. This serves as, this enables the creation of a consistent national data set that adheres to both federal standards, federal specifications, as well as validation requirements. So we're using the same folks to develop the data across the nation. What that does, while initially it didn't feel like optimization, the state hydrography steward role, state hydrography stewards, especially those that were actively engaged in NHD and WBD data, the NHD stewards, there was a lot of work involved. There was a lot of training involved. There was a lot of extensive time and effort to edit and update the data. And so that they've been relieved of that responsibility, which is a little scary. But on the other hand, the idea is that by moving the data development process, not the data updates, but the data development process to the contractors, that state hydrography stewards now can sort of focus on the needs of their state and kind of explore what the opportunities are for building upon 3DHP. So how do we make 3DHP work within our own states? And thanks to Jane and Josh in Washington, we actually have a state hydrography steward community at NSGIC in the My NSGIC communities to facilitate this discussion on how these folks are adopting and optimizing their roles. That group meets regularly. If you need information about how to join that, you can reach out to me, Bill, Jane, or Josh, and we can get you there. Any comments or questions about how the private sector is going, how the shift will go from the NHD steward to the private sector?
I'll just quickly weigh in, Linda, and say, the role of the stewards is key, and the local knowledge is key going forward for the data. So there's always a role for folks who know what's happening on the ground in your state or local area. And Jane had another question about the stream permanence values being either only applied to the new 3DHP data. The stream permanence values will be applied across the board to all the streams, not just the new data.
Getting that down. Okay, great. All right. Other questions, how are we going to make this happen? What's the planning and implementation approach? Well, first of all, is how do you engage is the state hydrography stakeholders? How do I inform and educate my folks about this? And 3DHP is developing a call to action fact sheet, and that is something that can be used by state hydrography stewards or hydrography lure coordinators, whatever term you want to use, to inform and educate stakeholders and administrators in developing your 3DHP work group, setting up partnerships, or whatever form of engagement is needing. So that'll be a resource that'll be available and consistent for information. Preparing for 3DHP acquisition as part of this project, practical steps. During the workshop, we held a workshop at the annual meeting, and it was all about what are you doing right now to prepare for 3DHP. We did an activity survey. There was a lot of discussion on the actual activities that folks are doing, and plus the NSGIC hydrography steward community discussion. So there's things going on in there. I should say that the materials for that workshop are now available at the 3DHP Info Hub. So if you're interested, we have a handout that summarizes the activities, and I believe, and you can access the meeting through the NSGIC Knowledge Base, the annual meeting presentations. And then planning for 3DHP acquisition. One of the things that USGS has asked, I got some interesting punctuation there, is that we expand the existing 3DEP acquisition planning guide to include 3DHP. And the thought there is that we would instead develop a 3D national, a planning guide for the acquisition of data in association with development of the 3D national topography model, the 3D NTM. And we are coordinating with Jordan and the 3DEP team to make sure we do that in a manner that supports both projects. So expanding that existing guide to include stuff that's general to both, but also breaks out specifics for each data type. And it is intended to be a step-by-step approach for engaging stakeholders, inventorying your resources, establishing plan goals, funding acquisition, the same things the previous guide did. And that is going to be the primary objective for the next project year. We've got an outline already, but moving forward on that will be the primary focus of our next project year. Any questions or comments on the planning and implementation? Funding 3DHP development. As you all are well aware, the DCA was released in September, and the whole purpose was to establish partnerships with USGS and other federal agencies, as well as your regional stakeholders to fund development of the data. One of the questions we also had in there was, how can I get cost estimates? And most of you are aware from the BEA process that the USGS products and service, the commercial partnership team can provide a preliminary government cost estimate for those applications. As we know, the initial application period is closed, but of course, as a reminder, USGS accepts applications usually into June if funding is available. So
yeah, that's correct. We normally keep it air quotes open until June, and that's kind of when we start running into agreement issues where we just don't have enough time to do agreements. Those interested in cooperative agreements, however, those really need to get moving earlier because there are some imposed deadlines from our Office of Acquisition on grants on when certain levels of cooperative agreement have to be completed. So those are a little bit earlier, especially for large cooperative agreements.
Thank you. So that is a very high-level overview summary of how the program is developing with respect to the questions and comments that this community had at the beginning of the project. You can go look at the summary. There's a spreadsheet where all of your questions were included and they were compiled, and there are specific responses to specific questions. So if you ask what's going to happen with your state plane coordinate system, there's a response in there. And I put the link into the comments. You can also access that summary from the 3DHP for the Nation Info Hub. any questions, comments? Anybody remember this effort? Again, this was to help us sort of figure out what the community needed to know, and hope this demonstrates that there's been listening on both the project and the 3DHP side, that these are important issues and questions that needed to be addressed. All right, got a quiet team today. Well, with that said, I'm now going to submit you to Culvert Mapping Good Practices. All of us, you all know better than I, the value of culvert data to effectively modeling the flow of water across the landscape. So we recently surveyed the community and found that there's a lot going on with regards to culvert mapping, and that a lot of these efforts, most of them were managed at the state level, even if they integrated with local and regional governments. And they were compiling data from all regional governments. We actually found a lot of federal activity too for federal specific sites, like specific Forest Service site or BLM region. So as we move forward with this national data set, it seems important to provide these on-the-ground efforts, mapping culverts, to do it in a manner that's going to support that modeling across administrative boundaries. We surveyed you. We appreciate you all gave us great feedback. We got a lot of information, and we developed what we're calling some good practices. We couldn't draw a lot out. And again, these are not based so much on any particular culvert mapping application like transportation, like highway maintenance versus fish barriers, but more about modeling that flow of water across the surfaces. So they're expected to evolve, but we wanted to run some initial thoughts by you, and we are going to ask for dialogue and feedback in this section to see what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and where we go next. So first of all, what is a culvert? And as most of you know, they are defined in a variety of ways. So for purposes of this guidance or discussion, we're going to call it's a transverse drain that channels water past or under an obstacle. And it's most commonly an engineered feature, there's a typo, located at the intersection of a stream with a road, railroad, drive, or trail. And in 3DHP, and I'll let Sylvia touch on this one, culverts are a subset of the elevation breaching connector feature type, but there are a lot of other breaching connectors that are required to allow the surface EDH to flow through obstacles in the DEM. Sylvia, do you want to expand on that, on how culverts are represented, or what type of, how they fall out as a feature within 3DHP?
Sure. The elevation surface itself doesn't always give you a clear idea of whether or not something is a true culvert or not. So we've steered away from calling our features that are breaching the surface culverts. And we're calling them this kind of more generic elevation breaching connector. So those are going to include your typical culverts that are underneath roads and railroads and driveways. But it'll also include things like terrain breaches, what we've called terrain breaches in EDH, which are areas where the LiDAR might not be smooth or filtered well. So we might have something within a stream channel that needs a breaching feature. So it's going to be a little bit of a combination of true culverts and other things that we need to identify in order to have downstream flow within our features. But for the most part, anything that intersects a road is more than likely a culvert, and the features that are in areas where there isn't a development or no roads are present on the surface, it's more likely something that is just an artifact within the LiDAR. So all of those will be lumped into this elevation breaching connector feature type.
Thank you. So
I guess I'd just add that each one is going to be represented in the network as its own separate segment. So you can still identify that segment and tie things to that segment. But
The
the
overall feature type.
yeah, but we're not going to be calling it a culvert per se.
So for purposes of this discussion in culvert mapping practices, does this definition work in general? Do people have applications or areas where this really doesn't, I mean, if we were to set forth some good practices and we started with the concept of what do we mean, what are we talking about? Does it give anybody heartburn? All right, I like that so far. Second of all, what geographic feature type is used to represent the culvert? Right now, we heard from you, it's everything from points, lines, and polygons. So everybody's doing a lot of different things. Lines are of the greatest value as they can be integrated into the mainstream model network and best support modeling, obviously, because they have an ingress and egress point. So one of the best good practices would be that folks should map their culverts as lines with endpoints attributed as either inflow or outflow. For those that capture their culverts as a polygon, the suggestion is that a center line representing a linear connection from upstream to downstream could be included. So again, I'll throw it out to the community. Does mapping culverts as lines make sense for you in your community? I know from reading the survey results, a lot of folks were using points, and mostly that seemed to be a resource issue. You had folks in the field, they were just grabbing a point in the center, in the estimated center, or at the end point, or that kind of stuff. So, and you guys can feel, we don't have a giant group, so if you want to come off and say something, please feel free. So I'm seeing yes, use of the lines for breach lines. I understand that. All right. If you had something you need to add here, this would be great. All right, here's the tricky part, attributes. Most of you know that USGS, our friend Roger Barlow, longtime NSGIC folk, was working with some conservation communities to see if they could come up with a set of culvert attributes. And I'm using, again, the term culvert very generically. And it quickly became obvious that that was a really maybe not feasible because of the many applications of the data. And I believe Mitch Bergenson's on here. So Mitch, at any point, if you want to jump in and add anything or correct me. And so I think that dialogue continues primarily among the conservation communities about how they can align their attribute values. They publish a lot of great resources. We do have a list of those that if we did come up with a good practices document, we'd include those. But it became clear that if this was going to be effective across application areas, we really needed a few universal attributes. And again, the whole purpose there is to facilitate the application of the data across boundaries. So we're going to present you a few culvert mapping attributes, not many, that we feel would facilitate the use of the data across administration boundaries, especially for hydrologic and hydraulic modeling. And we'd like to get your input on these. So the first attribute would be a main stem identifier. And this may be a bit, well, first of all, let me go back. Mitch, did you want to comment on the effort to
Sure.
develop? Okay, thanks. I'll go back one.
Yeah, you know, Roger started this exercise and a handful of us sat in and we're looking at various culvert data sets across the nation, and it was interesting and challenging at the same time, with some data sets having 2 attributes, some having over 100 attributes, and it really depended on obviously the resources of available to those collecting the data, but also the use cases, right? Infrastructure maintenance versus stream cross or fish habitat or fish navigation are completely different requirements. So the suite of attributes was very broad. And it was a challenge, if not impossible, to synthesize those in something that everybody could use and make everybody happy. So I think, and calling out Jim G. Gigliano from Wisconsin, the GIO, he had a group, wiki group, a Wisconsin coastal group that also attempted to do the same thing. And it's very complex because of the broad interest in culverts and the attributes associated with those. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Mitch. I appreciate that. So
Yep.
I believe that, yeah, and again, most of you know Roger went and retired on us for one part, but that dialogue continues, and we'll continue to monitor and get information. So back to the attributes. One of the key things would be a main stem identifier. This may be putting the horse before the cart a little bit, but you will be able to use the main stem model to get a network location, and then we can provide a link to a GeoConnects feature or a river collect location. This all throws back to use of the Internet of Water, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. Who maintains the culvert? In other words, and what is their email address, and do they have a unique identifier for the feature? By assigning a unique identifier for the feature, that can serve as a key for linking this information, as we talked about earlier. So do any of these, do these easily integrate into your culvert mapping? Are these things you're already collecting anyhow? Are there questions on, are there concerns about, say, generating a unique identifier for your feature? So I see in here, and I'll let Sylvia approach this. Does GeoConnect feature include ditches and canals?
Some ditches and canals, and if there's flow associated with them and it's an important part of the network, it would become something within which is assigned a main stem. There are a lot of ditches and canals that don't have flow associated with them, so those would not be part of the network that gets a main stem identifier. Although that is something that we're looking at this year as far as the model itself, how to identify those features that don't have flow. So we know that they're important for some applications, a stream or a canal that can't be identified with flow characteristics, as far as direction of flow. So that may change in the future, but right now, it's features that are part of the network.
Yes, and Rick asks, will each elevation breaching connector have a 3DHP unique identifier? And of course, the main stem model, every main stem and substem will have an identifier, but I'll let Sylvia touch on that as well.
Yes, so yeah, it'll be part of a main stem, which is a much longer identifier than what that culvert would be. Each segment also has an ID 3DHP, which is an identifier, unique identifier. It's only guaranteed to be unique for the instance of the data set. So if there are edits, it could change. So it's not a permanent identifier, but if it's always referenced back to the version of the data set that you're identifying it with, it will be unique. It's probably a better way to identify things for permanence across releases of our data would be to use a location along a main stem. So it would be a X, Y, and Z location on a main stem identifier, because that main stem ID will not change.
Right, and Jim, I'll get to your question in a section, but Allison follows up, so how do you determine if the main stem segment has flow? I mean, that's something you'll do through the EDH, correct?
Yeah, when we're collecting the data, the contractors, we actually haven't added this to the schema yet, but it is in our next release of the schema, we'll have a flow class feature type or flow class attribute that can indicate whether or not the it's going to be determined by the LiDAR elevation source. So if there's enough slope within a feature to assign a direction and it's not ambiguous with all related features, it gets a flow associated with it. If it's too difficult to determine based just on the LiDAR data, then it can have a flow class which is unable to be determined. We also have a flow class that's uphill or upslope for segments that are being pumped up to a higher elevation.
Jim G adds, a lot of times you don't know who owns the culvert. Of course, that's going to be a situation, and I think you would just have to just put none in there as far as responsible party. Anything you can associate with being on, say, on Forest Service lands or something like that. But yeah, that's a good point. We won't always have that value. Continuing with the attributes, we talked about mapping a line, and so we would want geographic coordinates of both the inlet and the outlet of that line. We're suggesting decimal degrees, and then elevation for the culvert at the upstream point and elevation at the downstream point. This would be the flow elevation, feet above mean sea level, again decimal degrees. These appeared, I think, in a lot of the attribute listings you guys provided. Any questions, comments? And then finally, and this is as brief as we're going to be, what is the width of the culvert? So at the widest points, this is one thing we had in debate. We looked at several specifications, and many of them specify the width in inches. But we didn't know if people were using feet instead of inches, decimal feet, and the same with the vertical measurement at the tallest point or the height of the culvert. So did anybody have any, do you all tend to use inches or feet in your measurements? Yeah, Sue says decimal degrees for elevation. Yeah, we do mean like, 12.5 inches. So I think that's a good idea to specify the number of, not decimal degrees, they're decimal places, Sue. Oh, but folks, so we would love to see meters. That makes a lot more sense to a lot of us, but we just didn't know that Allison suggested that. So again, and that's something that can always be converted. So that's not critical, but we just would like to standardize on a lot of what we saw was inches, I think, just because a lot of them were pipes, and pipes are usually specified as being a 24-inch, a 36-inch pipe, whatever. So we can continue that dialogue. And then finally, what is the culvert made of? What's the material? The surface type. So is it concrete, metal, plastic, wood, other? Again, that's going to help assess the flow characters. So that is the complete list of attributes. We didn't feel like we could go too much further, but would love to get your feedback. Are there other things that you think would be critical for you to pick up somebody else's culvert data and do something with it? And again, if you have big thoughts, please feel free to come off of mute. All right, a quiet bunch today. It's GIS day. You're tired from your GIS day martini lunch, right? Allison, why don't you come off mute? Oh, her mic's not working. Okay. So when does a culvert become just an underground ditch? We have a lot of ditches that flow into roads as a culvert, but some travel underground a long way. I will leave that to the experts to address. That means you, Sylvia.
By default. I guess we do flag a culvert if it's greater than 100 meters, but not as an error, just as something that we want to look at more closely because that's a pretty long culvert. I believe that as long as it is part of the network and it is making that connection, it shouldn't be a problem as long as it's truly a culvert. We haven't yet distinguished between culverts and underground pipes that might be part of a different type of a system, like a stormwater system. And we're looking at that as well. And that's where we kind of get into a little bit of ambiguity with, you know, how we're defining what these underground connections are. But for the most part, I guess to just simply answer the question, it's okay to have long culverts. And we know they do exist, so.
And Jane, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to come off mute?
Yeah, thank you. So it's probably obvious that I maybe wasn't paying attention to the whole series of culvert conversations that have been happening. Is the idea here that these are good practices for a statewide SDI layer of culverts that we should all aspire to? Or is this something that's going to become part of 3DHP?
No.
I'm a little
yes,
lost
yes,
here because my
yes.
department has no mandate to collect culvert data or coordinate culvert data, period. So,
Right,
but we're
no.
gonna, you know, and we need it. Nobody in the state is doing this on a statewide level. So
You're exactly right. I mean, I think your first comment, I believe, is, and I'll let Sue and 3DHP correct me, but the idea is that you're doing this anyhow. A lot of states are doing this, a lot of regional governments, whatever, whoever the entity collecting the information is doing it. And so if you're going to do it at a minimum, could you capture these features? They're pretty basic and most of you are already capturing them, but this is not, this is not an attribute set for the 3DH. This is not a proposed attribute set for the 3DHP. Sue or team, you want to address that?
Yeah, that's correct, Linda. I think that, you know, one of the things that this would be useful for is, as Linda suggested, is, you know, across administrative boundaries, having some consistency with states. And then of course your add-on attribute, should you be embarking in this kind of a, right, your state writ large, not necessarily your specific agency, be embarking on an effort to do this. And I think Jim G from Wisconsin kind of hit on it. Mapping of culverts can help to verify where we've put elevation breaching connectors that we are assuming are culverts in the elevation derived hydrography and in that goes into the 3DHP. So it's kind of a reference where culverts might exist, a verification, and it might well assist our contractors in identifying those sort of a priori when the data are being produced, the EDH data. So it's not a mandate, it's not an expectation, but should your state or an agency start to embark on it, it's the idea of having a set of good practices that folks can settle in on to help with interoperability and help with the elevation derived hydrography derivation.
okay, so is the idea then that this would, you know, once this is settled, you know, you have a attribute, you know, list that we all like. Is NSGIC going to have any role in kind of sharing this out with beyond the 3DHP community?
Jane, you hit the head on the, you're way ahead of me here.
Okay.
No, it's perfect. we've done this work, right? We've kind of settled on these. What do we do with this stuff? You know, this was good for our own discussion and all that. So the question is, do we continue down this circuit? Do we recognize that this is a bigger effort than feasible and we just keep the dialogue going? No need to publish a resource or anything like that. It just keeps as a dialogue. Or do we want to do something formal with this? I certainly wouldn't think it would be a requirements in any capacity. But do we want to put a living document out there where participants can add comments and recommendations? So again, this is up to the community. I'm going to ask Emily real fast. Emily, do we have do you think we can do the survey or?
Yeah, let's give it a go. I'm going to launch a Zoom poll that just has one question with a couple of options. So that should pop up on your screen.
I did catch that Alan. Okay, yeah. So here's, I don't know, I'm not able to interact with it. Are others able to actually answer the question?
Yes, I see. There has been an answer.
Maybe because I'm a host, maybe that's my problem.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too. I'm like, it's probably because they don't let hosts vote.
And it doesn't mean that one can't lead to two. We just don't. We just want to know how much energy as a project we should put into this. All right, well, I'll give you 10 more seconds to add an answer.
You're not seeing the poll. It might show up somewhere on the bottom bar.
I'm
with,
seeing the numbers. Yeah, I see it. Oh, you mean if the other folks
Yeah,
aren't
for
seeing it?
people who haven't answered, if it didn't pop up automatically, it may be on the bottom bar with like the chat and
You know this group, I think they're just giving it such deep thought. They're not prepared to answer the question at this time. So, all right, well, generally it looks like we're about at 60-40, that folks would like to see us come up with some sort of a product, a resource for the community. And so what we can do is, you know, we'll coordinate as the project, but I think the idea at this point is that we would go ahead and, you know, sort of codify this information, add those resources you can use, and publish a document that can accept comments and additions. You guys did so great giving us information about your attribute data sets. We could possibly integrate links to those where they're published online. And again, just hopefully make this a living resource for the community. So, Sue, do you have any comments on what to do with this thing?
This thing? No, I would say whatever the community wants to do with it, let's do that.
All right, I do want to go back. There were a few comments. Alan commented that 3DHP uses nav D88, not mean sea level. Is that something to consider? As far as requesting the information in.
Yeah, hi, Linda. I'll come off mute. This is Al. I just wanted to mention that the datum in the 3DHP right now, if I think I'm correct. I was just asking Sylvia this. It's NAVD 88, but you know, there are some new vertical datums coming in the future, not so far off, and so, you know, probably that'll change over time. But anyway, I think this was what you were going through was recommendations from the group, right? The Culvert working group, is that right?
No, it's the project team. There's
I see.
But we did, you mean the Culvert Working Group is the federal group that's.
Well, the slides where you had the attributes for the culverts, and you were suggesting mean sea level
Yeah,
for the elevations.
We derived those from existing documents, so I think that's
Right.
something to continue the dialogue on. So that's a very good point. Thank you. I'm going to go back. I see a question from Rick about how the prime vendors are using data. Rick, do you want to come off and ask your question? And then maybe some of the folks that are online, some of our prime vendors are online, if you guys want to address the question. Okay, I'll read Rick's question. Do you know how much the prime vendors are using this data? We have a large database of breach lines created mostly from Heads Up Digitizing. This database contains culverts and features that are needed to be breached in a DEM. So do any of our private sector partners want to chime in? And if not, that's okay. Rick says his microphone's out. Sorry about that. I didn't scroll down far enough, Rick. All right, well, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but again, this will be part of continuing the dialogue. So I don't, is Dennis on today? Dennis, are you here?
It does not look like it.
It doesn't look like it. He had called in and said that he wanted to share information about their pilot project, and but I don't have him here. Anybody else on the, that wants to share information about 3DHP or EDH related activities, things happening in their state, things they're learning, things they want to learn? We'll take a few minutes. You can come off mute or put it in the chat if that's better.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, this is Jim from Wisconsin. We have a pilot project where we're going to do 3 Huck 10s in the Green Bay region. We're calling this one map. We've selected NV5 geospatial, and they're going to do 3DHP integrated with NWI wetlands, and also the CCAP 1 meter land cover. So we're trying this out and hope to learn a lot from it. And of course, we're going to be testing the data in a lot of ways. The money comes from NOAA, so it's going to be coastal habitat assessments that we're trying to prove, and also county and state databases as well. So we just got our contract signed with NV5, and hopefully they're starting to work on it. So thanks.
That's fantastic, Jim. I'm signing you up for a info forum next year, okay?
Yeah, in a couple months, hopefully we'll have something.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I have a question for Jim. Jim, when you have a chance, can you send me what those 10-digit units are so I can kind of keep an eye on them?
You bet. Yeah, they go right through the middle of Green Bay, so they're pretty easy to find. So
Got it. Thanks.
So Allison has a question about 3DHP cooperative agreements. Can you see her question?
I can, and I probably want some clarifying questions, Allison, but I know you can't use your mic, so I'll just ramble on and hopefully can answer your question. We do, through the data collaboration announcement, we do offer an option where the partner can submit to get a cooperative agreement where the partner manages the contract themselves, normally contracted with one of the private sector partners. That's kind of how we prefer it, just because of the consistency of the data set. So if the project is accepted, USGS sends money to you for management of the contract. The expectation is that the data must come into us for validation. So your contract needs to include some leeway for corrections, as we validate and we request corrections from the vendor until we all agree that we've got it right. So there has to be a little leeway in there for validation. And then the data also must then come into the 3DHP data set. There's a little bit more information on the about cooperative agreements on the DCA portal, and I'll drop a link in the chat for you. And please send me an email if I didn't answer your question sufficiently, and we can talk about it.
Any other comments or information to share or questions for Sue and team?
Hey, Linda, this is Suzanne Whitewood in Tennessee.
Yes. Oh, yes.
I was just going to answer. You had a question for Dennis earlier, and I assumed he was on here. But anyway, this is the pilot project HUC 10 that we expect to have delivered at the end of the, but at least by the end of the year is what we're looking at. And so he may have thought we would have had a delivery already. There was a bit of a delay. So that's just kind of the update for that right now. That's in Tennessee. That's just a little bit northeast of Knoxville, where you can kind of see Knoxville in the lower corner there.
Thank you. All right, there's some resources from both Jim and Sue in the chat. Any other comments, questions? We don't let you talk too much during the forum, so this is your chance to express yourself. All right, well, I do want to thank you all, because the work we've shown here today is due to your active engagement with the program. It's you answering surveys, it's you responding to our emails, it's you sharing information through the forum, it's you publishing your resources. So we greatly appreciate that. It's helping us all move together collectively, which is the entire intent of this project. With that said, you know, our forum is held the third Wednesday of each month, which is today. We will not have a December forum. There's just a little bit too much going on during that time. We've got some federal meetings happening at the same time, so we'll give you guys a break. And then our next forum is January 17th. And I don't see Josh on today. Josh has agreed to come and talk to us about their QA/QC of their state EDH data. And he was a little hesitant to do that because he spoke briefly at the NSGIC annual meeting. I know he's going to be talking to the hydro community here this month. But it's really good information. They did a deep dive. They did some analysis, and the reason I'm really interested in it, because I think it's going to help folks really get a better handle on what this data is and what the potential for this data is. So hopefully you can join us on January 17th. There's a question from Allison about this recording being shared. Yes, Allison, we always publish these recordings for the forum and the interest group meetings at the NSGIC Knowledge Base. And you will, if you go to the NSGIC Knowledge Base and search on 3DHP, all of the forums and interest group meetings show up. You will need to log into the site. You already have a login, obviously, to access the materials. So if you can't get to the materials, it's because it's probably a button up above that says you need to sign in. And we thank Emily and all her work, because she keeps these things online and available to the community. So last call, questions, comments? I just want to thank you all for your time today. I know it's a busy day being GIS and all, GIS day. So again, we appreciate you taking your time out, and we appreciate all you do to help this project keep moving forward. So hope you all have a great afternoon.